Well, last video I promised we'd come back and talk about some climate control factors. Here we are. So climate control factors, these are major things that determine different climates around the planet. Our climate, for instance, in New York State is a different climate than if you were to live in Hawaii, still part of the United States. So there's lots of different factors, and today I think it's going to be around 6 factors we're going to get through. First one, latitude, most obvious. You know that the higher north you live, of course it's going to be colder, and that has to do with the fact the sun is lower in the sky. Even at noon, it's still lower in the sky. And so it's a combination really of two things, the duration of sunlight and intensity of sunlight, or duration and intensity of insolation, incoming solar radiation. And there's some other factors that play into that as you get farther and farther north. The albedo of snow and ice, the reflectivity of snow and ice also play a role in how warm it is in a climate. Elevation. It's pretty obvious in the troposphere, you know, if you climb mountains before, it's colder the higher up you go in the troposphere. And so that's a major effect on climate. So cities in the United States that are higher up in elevation tend to be cooler than cities at lower elevations, even at the same latitude. Okay, third climate control factor, distance from oceans or large lakes. Locations close to large water bodies have less variation in temperature over time. This is that water moderating effect. Remember, water has a really high specific heat compared to other substances. It's the highest on your chart in the front of your reference tables. And because it's so high, it tends to keep the temperature of the land near the water, especially downwind of the water, more moderated or more even over the year and over the day. And you can see that in New York State, these circled areas. The winds, remember? Winds are coming from this direction usually, or this direction some days, or this direction. But, you know, on average, it's a prevailing southwesterly wind. And so anywhere near the Great Lakes, downwind of them, or the Finger Lakes, right here, or if you live downstate, near Long Island and New York City, definitely moderated by these water bodies. We have much greater temperature swings in Fort Plain, New York, than they do. You know, us being in here, we're far away from all those water bodies. Okay, another climate control factor has to do with prevailing winds off of the ocean, not just off of lakes. Winds bring conditions for temperatures and moisture that are similar to the area upwind. And that's why Oregon, which is over here on the west coast, about the same latitude as us here in New York, experiences warmer winters than we do. They're right off the coast, so that warm, moist air is blowing off the ocean, moderating their winter temperatures, keeping it a lot warmer there, less snowfall than we get here in New York. Something that's really interesting to me, at least, in eastern Siberia, the unobstructed winds blowing across the Earth's largest continent there produce extremely cold temperatures in Siberia. There's no water nearby, no large water bodies to moderate and warm up those temperatures or keep them even. And so, you know, places way over here in eastern Siberia can have some of the most severe winters of any place on the planet. That's because it's such a large continent, and those winds are heading to the east. So they just have a long time to keep cooling off and cooling off and cooling off. Okay, another climate control factor, the prevailing winds and how they affect monsoons. In this picture on the right-hand side, upper right, you'll see that the winds are coming off the nice warm Indian Ocean onto the continent of India, over here too, Laos and Thailand. And that's producing monsoons, really heavy rainfall during that time of the year, and that's the summertime. But in the winter, those wind belts, remember, they shift around with the seasons. They move north, they move south. In the winter, everything's shifted, and the air is coming off the land. Now, just above this picture down here are the Himalayas. or the Himalayas, Mount Everest, and every mountain around it like that. And that's a really cold, high plateau, and all that cold air comes off the land and brings dry weather to the continent there in the wintertime. So that's what the monsoons are all about. Those seasonal shifts in the wind directions bring either moisture or dry air. All right, another climate control factor, and we already discussed this when we talked about that rubber ducky episode, or that rubber ducky lesson. The warm and cold ocean currents of the world, these actually can affect climate quite a bit. And I always like to take a look at the picture of the Gulf Stream. And here's the Gulf Stream, kind of like forming little eddies and currents. But it's running up and over towards Europe. And that moderates their temperatures in Europe. And there's the Gulf Stream on your reference tables right here. It turns into the North Atlantic Current and the Norwegian Current, but it gives some more moderate temperatures to places in England and up in Scandinavia. These places would normally be frozen in, much colder than we are, because they're at such a much farther north latitude than we are here in New York. But that warm water helps them out. And warm currents seem to originate. The warm currents, remember, have a solid line here. And they always seem to originate near the poles, which makes sense. They're warm currents. Cold currents originate near, I'm sorry, did I say the poles? Warm currents seem to originate near the equator. Cold currents originate from the poles, and they work their way, if they can, they work their way farther towards the equator. Southwest Scotland, similar latitude to central Canada. This is how ocean currents can drastically modify climates. So we wouldn't have that anywhere here in New York State, but if you live in an area farther north, but the ocean modifies your climate, sure enough, you can have more tropical plants growing there. Okay, more climate control factors. Vegetative cover. Areas with drastic reductions in vegetation show changes in local climate. And here they are clear cutting a forest. You can see the livestock is being driven away. And this is cattle farming across these large ranches, like for instance Brazil. And it's a big threat to the rainforests that exist there now. A fifth have been lost since 1970. And ranches are blamed for 80% of all deforestation in this region. Cattle numbers have grown from 21 million in 1995 to 56 million in 2006. And so, you wonder, perhaps that's why we have such cheap hamburgers at the fast food joints, is because they're doing this to the rainforest to get cheap meat. Not exactly sure if that's the case here, but you get the idea that that's happening somewhere on the planet to get those dollar menu deals. And this is pretty sad to see. This is clear cutting in Brazil, taken from above, this photograph. And all these little grids you see here are where they've cut down roads, or they've cut down trees to form logging roads, and then they move in to the heart of the rainforest and they start removing trees along side roads from the main roads. And so it's like a grid pattern, and it's sad to see, because these forests have a lot of resources that are better left alone. For instance, medicines for curing different kinds of diseases we don't even know about yet, and all that biodiversity of life that's going to perhaps become extinct because of our actions. Makes you think. All right, so that's our lesson on climate control factors. See you back next time.